Okay, I think we're set to get started then. All right, hello everyone, welcome. Thank you for being here today. We are so excited to see everyone back for session 3, here to talk about culture, cultural humility, and cultural relativism. Tonight's event is just part 3 of a longer series in the Community Education Series hosted by the Muskingum County Social Justice Coalition and Muskingum County Library System, as well as supported by the City of Zanesville, the Convention and Visitors Bureau, the Chamber of Commerce, and the Community Foundation. The series is on the third Thursday of every month through December of this year, and participants who attend at least 7 sessions get a certificate of completion. During the session, we will put a link to the next event so you can register today. And then just some housekeeping. Please mute yourselves and remain on mute until the Q&A. During the Q&A, please raise your hand and Daryl will call on you to ask a question, or he may ask you to ask the questions during the chat as well. And then just a final reminder, the session's being recorded. We post them on the Muskingum County Library System YouTube, and we will be sharing them on our Facebook page as well with Muskingum County Social Justice Coalition. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Daryl Graves.
Thanks, Stephanie. Good afternoon, everyone. We appreciate you being here. Stephanie's already welcomed you and reminded you about the series that we're participating in, that we're offering for you. So again, we appreciate you being here. And we got off to a good start last month with Dr. Anita Jackson talking to us about culture. And so tonight, we're going to do a brief poll here in a second, but after the poll, Dr. Amy White, who's a associate professor of philosophy at our university, is going to join us. She's also one of the core members of the Muskingum County Social Justice Coalition, and she's going to talk to us about cultural humility and relativism. So I'm going to ask Heather to put up just a quick poll. We just want to get a little information from you about how you ended up here tonight, and then we'll be ready to start our presentation. Thank you, Heather. And we will share with you when we report out to you. We'll give you some feedback on the participation that we're seeing in our sessions and what that means for us and how it helps us craft what we're going to offer for you each time we continue moving forward with the series. One last thing for me, as you hear our presentation from Dr. White, if you have a question that occurs to you that you don't want to forget, feel free to go ahead and put it into the chat during the presentation, and we'll get to it after the presentation to make sure that we respond to it or have some appropriate discussion about that. And we would ask that what you enter are questions for the presenter to talk about based on the information that you're hearing at the time or after the presentation. So without anything else from me, Dr. White.
I'm Dr. Amy White, as Daryl said, and today I'm just going to give you a little breakdown of what cultural relativism is, how it came about, potential problems with it, and then what I think is a viable alternative and one that might help us engage in understanding relationships with one another. So last time Dr. Jackson gave us some ideas about what culture is. So cultural relativism is a term that is not often heard, but the ideas are shared quite often between people. So in general, it's just a view that what a person does and that ethics should be judged on the basis of one's culture, not against other cultures. That, how a person behaves. I mean, at the logical limitation of this, there's the idea that there is no universality in ethics or no universality in judgment of others, that it's only against their culture by which we can judge their actions. So there is no universal ethics, basically. There is no universal right and wrong. It's just in relationship to culture. Now, cultural relativism came about mostly in anthropology, and it was reactionary. It was reactionary against things such as, us going to different places of the world and saying, hey, you savages, let's improve your life, and giving you lots of diseases and bringing over things and causing death and, oh yes, and enslaving you sometimes. But, this idea that, we are improving your life and there's nothing we can learn from you, that our culture is just the be all end all, right? So one of the famous figures that brought forth this idea of cultural relativism was Ruth Benedict. And she was a student of Margaret Mead. Many of you have probably heard of Margaret Mead. Her works are famous. She was an anthropologist that went to a lot of South Pacific islands and started realizing that their way of rearing children was in many ways superior to ours. So that kind of opened up. So wait a minute, we're not the most advanced culture in this? Maybe that other cultures can maybe teach us something? So Ruth Benedict, it's also important to know, she was a bisexual woman. In fact, she engaged in a relationship with Margaret Mead, which was her teacher, also 15 years her senior. But and she was with Mead at her death. So for someone living in that time period, you have a culture that deeply disapproves of your lifestyle, of who you are, of even, the limitations that were placed on things like her research and where she could study, where she could be a professor, etc., just because she was a woman. And she said, hey, look, there is nothing set in stone about this culture. And this is a quote from hers. She says that we recognize that morality differs and that every society and is a convention for socially approved habits. She says it's always been preferred to say it's good rather than it's just habitual. But she says that really the two are synonymous, that people just believe that what their culture does is right. Now, anthropologists often call this, looking at the world through different colored glasses or tints, like that your culture makes you view the world in very different ways, that it molds your ideas of ethics, right and wrong, what is acceptable, what is the proper interactions with people, through one tint and another through another tint. And those two just don't always mix really well together. And I can certainly see the impetus for things such, for the development of cultural relativism. Okay, if you don't know who John Calhoun is, he was the 7th Vice President of the United States and defended slavery. And he obviously did not embrace cultural relativism. This is that type of attitude. He says, never before have people from Central Africa, from history to the present day, lived in such a civilized condition, basically, that their lives were so improved by bringing them here, morally and intellectually. There was also the argument made that we have done slaves a great favor because we have brought them where they can learn about God. That if it weren't for us, they would all go to hell, basically. That slaves should thank us for bringing them into this culture. This idea, again, that our culture is right, that we know what's right. And so it's easy to see why there's pushback. It's like, maybe you should reevaluate that. And so I think cultural relativism arose from really noble motives to say, hey, your culture is not the end all be all, that you should probably recognize that other people and other cultures, are very different, and they have things that they can teach you. They have things that you can't judge them on your culture. So we all know that there's tons of cultural differences, and different things have been treated in different ways amongst cultures. One interesting example is there's a lot of attacks of trans people lately, denying health care, trying to have trans people out of sports, etc. But in over 130 Native American tribes, and not only North American, South American, Central American, there were people who were essentially trans. Berdashis are sometimes called two-spirited. And in many of these tribes, they were actually looked on as holy people, as having a connection between two worlds, as being very important spiritual leaders. There are some cultures that have 5 different gender classes, you know, not just 2, not just male and female. Some have male, female, basically anyone's guess, or feminine males and feminine females. So, hugely different. So when you say, oh, trans is new, these types of things, no, it's not new. And most of my research these days is in the philosophy of death and dying. So I have to tell you this story too, of the Colotians. So the Greek historian Herodotus wrote over 2,000 years ago this story, and it's supposedly based on real life. So he said that the king of the Persians summoned a group of Greek men and who cremated their dead, and said to the Greek men, how much money would it take for you to eat your dead? Cannibalism, for you to eat your dead. That's Indo-cannibalism, eating, the dead of one's own tribe. And they said no amount of money could make us defile our dead that way and eat our dead. He said, okay. And then he summoned a group of Colotians and said to them, now, the Colotians ate their dead. In fact, they believed that the only way to properly respect their dead and have the spirit of the dead live within them was to consume their dead. And so he said to the Colotians, he said, how much money would it take? How much, not money, but, wealth and just general trappings and luxuries would it take for you to burn your dead? And the Colotians begged the king not to speak of such horrors of dishonoring their dead. So those things which we even have strong emotional reactions to can be very different amongst different cultures. Ruth Benedict pointed this out. Now, for cultural relativism, there's this really basic argument that because different cultures have different moral codes, there's no real objective morality, no right, no wrong. Things are just different. They vary from culture to culture. Now, this looks convincing to many people, where they say, well, look at this culture, look at this culture, look at this culture. But there is a flaw. Just because cultures have different moral codes, it doesn't necessarily mean that some aren't more supported than others, that some don't contribute to human flourishing more than others. This is also an argument generally given for cultural relativism. And it talks about bias, that members of a society are going to use that society's standards to judge other cultures. And in general, we're going to think that we're right, that our society, has the right way to do things, and others have a wrong way. So the use of these standards gives us a bias that we can never overturn, that we can never neutrally judge another culture. So if I go into another culture, I'm looking at their culture through the tinted glasses I already have. And it's going to prevent me from truly seeing things. And thus, I am never going to be able to neutrally judge them. And I have no basis to say what they're doing is wrong. Now, this all sounds fairly good, but while cultural relativism, I think, arose from very good motives and can teach us a lot, there are some problems. I know, it just says however. And we see this right now with people embracing their culture as an end all be all. How many times have you heard Confederate statues or Confederate flags, etc., being defended as it's my cultural heritage? Or how about, or oh gosh, I mean, even things like this nostalgia for, say, the 50s way of American life. Well, but that's what the American dream, American culture is supposed to be. Can we say that there is no universal right or wrong, that, say, the Nazis were not immoral, just a different culture? I'm not going to say that. Like, I'm quite comfortable in saying that they were immoral bastards. Quite comfortable with that. Like, really. You know, yes, it's different. Yes, I might not get the full nuance, but that's just evil. So, this is an argument against relativism with those things in mind. If ethical truth is relative, no way of living is better than any other, but some ways of living are better than others. Thus, ethical truth is not relative. I think, at least at the very minimal, we can agree that living as we are, living like a Nazi, are not equivalent, you know? Or even living how we did back when we could say own people. Now, granted, there's still so much that needs changed, but I'm going to say that living now is better. Maybe not by much, but better. Right? There are some things that we can, I think, rightly say, that's messed up. Or you're carrying a flag that promoted slavery. Sorry, your culture doesn't excuse it in this case. Now, in regards to the argument that we're always going to be biased by looking at different cultures, yes, but maybe that's not such a bad thing. A writer, C.S. Lewis, he did The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, brilliant writer, but he also did philosophy. You might not know that. And he has this little piece that's called Meditation in a Tool Shed, where he talks about, the underlying message is actually about religion, but he talks about being in a tool shed and seeing this beam of light come in. And it's a really dusty tool shed. And he looks at the beam from the outside, and it looks one way. But then he steps into the beam, and man, it looks an entirely different way. So he says looking along the beam and looking at the beam are very different experiences. But here's the thing. Neither one is right. Yes, where we stand biases us. But perhaps both stances have something to teach us. Maybe a more complete picture is looking at both together. So, of course, I'm biased by whether I'm looking along or looking inside or looking outside for a culture. But both might tell us something unique about it. Thanksgiving. And tell you an interesting story here. So, I am not originally from the United States. I came here when I was a teenager. And I had gone to school with a girl who we became very close friends in school. And at the time, people still used phones. I couldn't just, Zoom her or text her or these types of things. So I had very limited minutes that I could talk to her each month. That was it. So I could only call my best friend when I got here, very little bits. And so I had my first Thanksgiving ever. I'm a teenager and I had my first Thanksgiving. And so I tried to describe to her Thanksgiving. And her family was from South Africa originally. And I was trying to describe Thanksgiving. So just write in chat. If you had to describe Thanksgiving to someone, what would you say? Well, and how would you describe Thanksgiving? I mean, I tried, the family sits down to dinner. Okay, good. I'm getting some things here. A day of gratitude and food with family. I said something similar to that, and she said, well, aren't you grateful every day and have food with your family? I'm like, well, no, but lots of food and family. Yeah, she found that strange that it didn't happen all the time. Spending time with family, eating lots of food. She thought that that's just what people did. Loved ones, gatherings, thanks and gratitude. She said, why don't you give thanks and gratitude every day? Family, food, good, good. All gathering. These are very similar. To celebrate harvest, yes. I didn't use that one quite yet. But I tried all these with her, really, and she just wasn't getting how it was different than any other day. You're supposed to be thankful. Aren't you thankful always? She would say to me. Well, yes, but this is different. I even brought in the football. You eat so much, you pass out, you watch football. It wasn't until I started talking about turkeys and the president even pardoning a turkey that I heard an, oh, yeah. That sound when someone gets it? And she said, yeah, Africa has these. Lots of tribes do it. It's a ritual bird sacrifice to celebrate the harvest. Happens in many tribes, right around your Thanksgiving time. Thankful for an abundant harvest. Usually an elder sacrifices the bird, carves it. The family gets together. They're all thankful for everything that's gone. And I, just having celebrated this, had no idea to even think of it that way. I mean, how many of you have thought of Thanksgiving as a ritual bird sacrifice for the harvest? Hey, family's here. We're having our bird sacrifice tonight. Like, really? So, but yeah, she was absolutely right. This happens in culture after culture. Same time of year. It's a cultural ritual bird sacrifice. But it took an outside perspective to see that. Embedded in it, I couldn't see that. So sometimes outside bias can actually lead us to some good things. There's an article from Anthropology about Americans going to the dentist. And they use a tribal name so you don't know. And my God, the way it's written, it sounds horrific. But then you realize wow, that's us. It's crazy. Sometimes being in a culture can actually bias you to seeing like faults of your culture. The bias can go both ways. So I don't think that cultural relativism is really the way to go. Here's an alternative in learning about each other's culture. It's called cultural humility. Humility, sorry, not humidity. Hey, I've talked for 6 hours already today. I've taught 3 classes. Cultural humility. So this is a process and an attitude. It's where you interact with people in ways that are other oriented, to be open to the other and to be open to cultural differences and cultural identity. You know, it's really in right now to have like cultural sensitivity programs and things like that, or cultural awareness. But then what are you supposed to do? Get this stamp and now you're woke, basically. No, cultural humility is this idea that it's a lifelong process of being open, exchanging with the other, learning from each other, and reflecting on your own damn bias. And realizing with humility that you might be wrong. And you know what? It's hard for us to admit that we're wrong. It's so hard. But honestly, I'm wrong all the damn time. You know? We're all wrong. We're not God. You know, we all mess up. And it's a lifelong process of gaining knowledge, including cultural knowledge. So it focuses on appreciating differences, having a journey together, and learning from another. So you approach someone with, hey, I don't know much about you. I want to learn. And no preconceived notions that I know what's right and I'm going to judge you against it. What can you teach me? What can I learn from you? Tell me about yourself. Tell me about your culture. Tell me about how you see the world so I can better understand you and so I can be a better person. You know, you don't get a gold star of, cultural appreciation. And it's hard. It's hard to show humility. And it's lifelong. It does not stop. And, this started in psychology, kind of a way of therapists who come from different cultures of relating to their patients and moved into social work. But it can work with anyone, I think. And why might we want to do this? One, it's a commitment to be evaluative with ourselves and to critique ourselves and to realize that we are never a finished product. I can't stamp myself as perfectly culturally aware, like, no, I'm never finished. And honestly, I'm never going to fully understand. But damn it, I'm going to keep trying. And when done correctly, I think it can fix some power imbalances where none should exist. And this was important between, say, clients and therapists and things such as this. But we're oftentimes, or even social work, we're oftentimes the person that has clients would think that, okay, I have answers and you've come to me for answers. But often when a person is from a different culture, your answers are just going to be they're not going to be very helpful to them. When you recognize that this is a person that you can learn from, a person of equal value, it breaks down some of these boundaries. And in order to really engage on this journey, we have to learn more than just what people teach us. We need to know the history. And, like we need to know about Jim Crow. We need to know the violence. We need to know the history of voter suppression to see what's happening today. We need to see the oppression against groups of people to sometimes understand reactions. Like, there's some work done right now with, people who are Black and urging everyone to get vaccinated for COVID. If you don't know what Tuskegee is, how are you really going to deal or be able to talk to someone about, mistrust when it comes to government health programs? And if you don't know what Tuskegee is, oh my goodness, please look it up. Tuskegee Airmen. It was a very bleak and horrific thing that happened to a group of Black sharecroppers, who had untreated syphilis even after we could cure syphilis. So anyway, but things like that root some of the things we see today. So cultural humility involves learning in several areas. And while it's not cultural relativism, cultural relativism perhaps goes too far. Cultural humility seems to fit a little bit better. Recognizing that we have bias, recognizing that we are not the ultimate, arbiter of what is right and what is wrong, and recognizing that we can learn a great deal from others. Maybe even learn things about our own culture that sometimes we might not even like. It's hard, but I think that overall it's worth it. Oh, I'm slightly over the time that I was allotted, and now it's question time.
Thank you so much, Dr. White. That was an excellent presentation for us to learn from. So now it's time for your questions. If you have questions, you can raise your hand or you can put them into the chat, and we have plenty of time to recognize you and have Dr. White respond to your question.
Anyone? Come on. Yeah, I see a hand. Is it Kathleen? Someone up there? Oh, you're muted.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Now I'm unmuted. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, is it not safe to say that in almost every culture, kindness is okay and the golden rule is okay?
Oh.
Do unto others as you would have them do to you. Now, I have the experience of making chocolate cake for people who are allergic to chocolate. But then they tell you, and then you know not to do that.
Right.
But I mean, are there not some human basic things that most people get?
Like some universalities? Yes, but perhaps not the ones that you're referring to. Kindness is, what could be seen as kind in one culture could be seen as insulting in another, in some cases. And the golden rule, do unto others as you would have done unto you, I think actually causes a lot of harm. I mean, just taking it to a logical limit, something like, what if you liked being punched in the face? Do unto others as you would want done unto you. That doesn't sanction you punching everyone else in the face, right? And I think this is where some types of relationships go wrong too, especially if you're talking to someone from another culture, that we start treating them how we want to be treated instead of really understanding how their differences implement different ways that they want to be treated. So I think that the golden rule could actually do quite a bit of harm, especially in interacting with people of another culture. Now, there are some things. All cultures generally have some protections for children. Not all the same, but they do. All cultures generally have some prohibitions against lying. I mean, we only have it maybe contractually, but that people are, that it's looked down upon, they're shunned, etc. And most have some prohibitions against some type of homicide. Now, although who's included and excluded in that varies differently. So those are kind of three general threads that we see amongst cultures. But yeah. So to answer your question, there are some indeed, and I would like to think kindness, but again, kindness can be defined in some different ways. Like I lived in Japan for 6 months, and we consider it a kindness to compliment people here. Like, oh, I love your dress, or I love this. Well, in Japan, when you compliment someone about something, say you love their bonsai or something, it's in the other room, my bonsai. That's how I got a bonsai, because then they feel an obligation to give it to you. Yeah, but I didn't realize that this was, not something you really did. It was like, oh, wow, okay, then you like this so much, you must have it. And oh, yeah, I didn't know that. So what I thought was a kindness wasn't going over that way, and I was collecting things. So it's like, then once someone told me, it was like, oh no, I felt so bad. But I do have a cool bonsai. It was kind of a pain to ship, but well, there's that. Okay, wait. Can I provide examples of cultural humility? Most of the examples are unfortunately in literature. There's a ton of literature about, in the research literature, about how therapists have used this with people from different culture and social workers right now. But thankfully, there are a lot of articles that have been done on it. So if you wanted to, you could just do even like a Google, what is that search that they have? It's like a Google literature search, and you'd be able to find it from there. Objectively evil. Oh, yeah. I don't think that there's anyone that wouldn't say Hitler's Germany was objectively evil unless they had a screw loose. Now, I think mass genocide, we can probably chalk that up as objectively evil. I mean, mass genocide of someone who's not threatening. I tend to think there's this general prohibition that we don't cause vast suffering to others without a very good reason. So there are a couple things that do seem to be somewhat solid. Yes, yeah. I do have some strategies. One of the things I do with my students, and unfortunately, I don't have as many international students as I once did. Hopefully, that will change very soon. Is I take the time to get to know them. And like, I teach ethics and things like this. And I always ask, I ask everyone, how does your culture see this? So what I do is I make my students that are from right here too. Yes, Google Scholar. Sorry, little brain fry today. I'm finally feeling human though after my second COVID shot. So hey, there's that. Yeah, but I even if they're from here, I say, well, how does your culture see this? And how does, what do you think about that? How do you think that others might see that? And when I have international students, I get some very different answers that we can compare and contrast with. And also, when I meet with them, I always ask more questions than I answer. I mean, they come to me for answers, but in order to do that, I need to find out about you. I need to find out what's right for your situation. I mean, unless it's something like, when is the paper due? Okay, well, but if it's like, look, I'm struggling in this class, I need to find out about you. It might almost seem intrusive sometimes, me asking so many questions, but it's the only way that I can really, really learn from them to help them. Oh, yeah, something like that. But it's also um, treating them how they would want to be treated. Tom and Christine's question. Yeah, that's a pretty good way to look at it. But it's also a process of learning. I mean, I need to learn a lot about you to see how you would want to be treated. And I have to learn a lot about me too to see where our best interactions are going to be. I don't have any recommended books because it's usually a section in a textbook at this point, but there are lots of articles. Oh, uh, Anita might have a book that she knows about. If you do, please put it in chat. Utilized in our training. Yeah, listening, asking questions. And this is really important, not coming across like we know it all. Yeah, yeah. And I've had students come to me and tell me that I'm the only accessible professor they have, that they feel that they can talk to. And it's because I don't say, this is the way it is. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes.
Doesn't it all come down to just good communication skills where you really listen to other people? I mean, you do that with people every day without even thinking that they're from a different culture because we're all from different cultures, our family cultures, so if you treat every person that way, whether they're from a completely different, it would still come out to good communication skills.
Oh, good communication skills is definitely part of it.
Yeah, they're really listening to each other.
Oh, yes. Yeah, listening is incredibly important. But while there might be slight differences when we live in the same place and in our cultures, once you get to bigger differences, I think it involves more than that too. It involves criticizing your own bias. Like, I know that sometimes, I mean, I'm a philosopher, we give papers and sometimes and then we respond and we show the error of other people's papers and things like this. But, sometimes I'm listening, I'm really listening, but at the back of my head, I'm listening to ways that I can find flaws. Like, I am not listening with the thought that maybe I'm the flawed one. So it's not only listening, it's how we're listening and the attitude towards ourselves too. Yeah. but definitely communication skills. So much that. So much that. Thank you. Allison has her hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. And listening to what you were saying and the question that was just asked about communication skills, it made me think about, wouldn't exposure essentially be the key to getting to this point? And when I say exposure, I think about a place like, Zanesville, where culturally it comes across as definitely homogeneous. So wouldn't exposure be a critical piece to getting to this point also, along with communication? Um, so in order for us to be able to support, I'm in my context, I'm thinking about students. Like I talk a lot about cultural competency and cultural awareness when I'm preparing my educators to go into classrooms and work with families and work in communities. But in order for them to be able to understand that, exposure is key. Also, being able to check our biases at the door and understand that we come to the table with implicit biases.
Oh, yeah.
So I think that's one of the bigger challenges in getting to this point, is that exposure or lack thereof.
Absolutely. And I mean, you're not going to be able to do a cultural humility exchange with someone until you've got someone in front of you, too. So you definitely need some prep going into things. Check our biases at the door. Man, if you find a way to do that, let me know. Like, I think with cultural humility, you work on it. I mean, the first part is realizing that you have those biases and that the way I'm thinking about what you're saying to me might be wrong because of my bias. So, step one. But yeah, absolutely exposure. This wasn't an exercise in cultural humility, but I don't think that I really understood a lot of the racial problems in the United States, and yet I am still learning until I fell in love with a Black woman, until I had a partner who was a Black woman, and had the exchange, had those uncomfortable exchanges, had those soul bearing exchanges. Like, yeah, that was, we have this shield up. When we let it down, when we realize our flaws, is sometimes the only time that we're able to absorb what people are saying to us. It was that relationship the first time I really experienced that. But I mean, I think we can get there without a relationship too. Once we are just humble about ourselves. I have got a couple hands up here. Who has a hand up question?
Rebecca?
Oh, yeah. Mine isn't a question so much as a suggestion. When we moved here from Oregon, which we lived in a university town with a lot of international students, and I recognized moving to a small rural area, this was not going to be the school system norm for my kids.
Yeah.
We started hosting exchange students, and it's learning goes two ways, just like you said, and having them live in your home for a school year, you really, have a chance to develop and understand where their view of America as opposed to our view of their country. We had a student from Peru who came and was amazed when he came home from school in his first week, and I was cooking dinner because in his opinion, Americans all went to McDonald's or Burger King or went out to dinner or got takeout. The fact that I could cook was like an amazement to him. We had a kid from Germany who thought Americans all carried guns.
That's very common, yeah.
Yeah, and that he was really surprised when he ended up in a farm because and we didn't have any public transport. You know, just things that people accept as normal everyday things. I mean, in Europe, kids can drink before they're, when they're 18, 19, and they go out to discos and parties and things starting at 10 o'clock in the evening when you're 16, 17. And I say, well, no, I'm sorry, Zanesville kind of shuts down at dark, so you are out of luck. And you can't drive, and there's no public transport, so you are stuck on the farm, buddy. But just these whole things that we had students from Brazil and Peru and France and Germany and that's those five. But it's amazing what you learn from talking to people and and kids have a lot less reluctance to say what the hell. They are much more willing to say, well, that's not the way my mom does it, or that's my mom doesn't let me do my own laundry. It's like, well, here you do. So, I think if we could encourage people to host more exchange students, even that little bit will help adjust some attitudes.
So it's interesting, Rebecca, that you mentioned exchange students. That it prompts me to go back to a couple of questions that were in the chat that I'm not sure that we've given Dr. White an opportunity to address.
Yeah, I still got
fully. One was related to incorporating cultural humility into the education process, and then a similar question was about ethics and about how we might or do we expect young people to understand ethics and ethical behavior if they're from an environment that doesn't really foster the development of appropriate ethics. How do we fit that into the classroom?
Yeah, in that question, there's a bit of an equivocation going on there. Like, I teach academic ethics, which is a branch of philosophy. Philosophy, I mean, people think ethics, and they think that it's being taught what's right and wrong, and that's not that's not academic ethics. At the base of it, philosophy is basically math. I take arguments, I break them down into symbols, and then I analyze them like math. So what I teach is probably very different. We look at the flaws and arguments for what is ethical or what isn't ethical. We break down the arguments and we analyze them to look for logical flaws in the structure of them. So it's a bit different there. And again, when people think about just like teach ethics, not academic ethics, which is more a critical thinking exercise than anything in some ways, and mathematical exercise, I think that almost violates cultural humility right there. Like, if I think that I know what's ethical, like I'm already coming in with that, okay, I'm going to show you what's right. And we don't want to do that. We want to come to a place where we work together and see each other through and come to a mutual place of understanding, where, perhaps we can find something that's mutually beneficial for both of us. So, I mean, I question whether outside of academic ethics that we should actually teach ethics like that. Let me say, I've got a couple other things. I thought that I answered that one about implementation strategies. Listening is most definitely a skill. Yes, yeah, there's a lot of work done on effective listening and communication. Um, okay, I saw some hands. Oh, Dr. J. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I know in counselor training we do a lot in terms of listening. We have a whole semester just on listening and the different
Nice.
active listening and how you do that from a number of different ways. I also thought of a couple of activities I was involved in where uh, there was a group they were talking and the people sitting on the outer part of the circle had to talk about what they saw in the group. And one of the things that they saw in the group, looking at males and females, that women did not have shoes on and they sat on the floor, and the men sat in chairs and they had shoes on. Well, people made all kinds of assumptions about that. But in the end, the women were truly being honored because they are the ones that are closest to the earth and have a spiritual connection with the earth. And so they were allowed to have, be barefoot.
Yeah.
And it wasn't an oppressive kind of thing. The other one was, if I can remember, I'm blanking on it right now. Maybe it'll come to me. But both of them were activities in which people made assumptions early and found out later once the cultural group explained it, it was totally different than what they thought. But cultural humility um, is extremely important in terms of listening, asking questions, opening yourself aside, and just listen to what others have to share.
Absolutely. I love that example. I really love it.
Oh, I just remembered.
Oh,
The men have, when they have a piece of land, they have to set trees around their land as a barrier. And so one of the questions was, because the whole discussion was about the men putting trees around their property. Well, if a woman owns land, where does she also put trees around her property? And the response was, woman owns the land wherever she goes, wherever she steps foot. I thought
that's
that was
great. I love that. That was really great. Yeah, like we can charge in and be like, oh, look at that, you know? And we don't know. We don't know until we really try to put ourselves aside and ask and listen and engage. Yeah. Question in the chat, where do I see this happening? Or hope it happens? I hope it happens anytime you have an interaction with someone who is unlike you in some way. I mean, but sure, schools definitely. I mean, most of the literature that's come out has been in psychology, counseling, social work, those types of things. But I think it has a lot to teach us about just our general interactions with each other. Like if I have a neighbor that moves in that is from a different culture, there might, and suppose, I see them doing something that I don't like. How am I going to approach that? Well, I would suggest approaching it with humility and learning and listening and understanding between each other. Why is this going on? Why am I bothered by it? Maybe I'm wrong that I'm bothered by it. Now, I'm not talking about someone, say, sacrificing goats on their front yard or something like that, but I mean just something that you might think is, that makes you feel a certain way. instead of going in and saying, hey, you can't do that, blah, 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 blah. Hey, well, what is this about? Tell me what it means to you. You know, what is your preferred way of doing, engaging. You might find out that you're wrong, but you have to be open to that. You have to be open to saying, like, well, shoot. Yeah. I see why they're sitting on the floor, and I like it. Yeah.
Looks like Kathleen has another question. Go ahead.
We actually did have someone sacrificing goats not in the front yard, but in the backyard, because they were Islamic and they couldn't get any, they keep halal. They couldn't get their animals any other way.
Yep.
To keep their own kind of kosher. And so the neighbors were just scandalized. But really, they weren't doing anything that a farmer wouldn't do, but they were in town doing it. And so people were flipped out about it. So, these things do happen right here in Zanesville, Ohio. And maybe, we should be aware that there are people who, in order to be able to eat it all, they may have to do things that we wouldn't do, but they do it because they need to.
Right. And I mean, understanding what's happening, etc. And again, just trying to put your ego aside is the first step in trying to work any of this out. Rebecca, I see your hand.
Yeah, just one suggestion before going to somebody and saying, why are you doing this or whatever, to do a little cultural research before you go ask the question.
Sure.
Because to put it in the right perspective and to approach it in the right way, it's best to have some basis of information, and because how you approach somebody can radically affect how they answer. And I'm thinking of examples like in areas where there's a large Asian culture. In some of those Asian cultures, it's not permissible for a woman to touch anything from a man not in her family. So if they're working in a store and they don't want to take the money from your hand, that can be insulting to some people. But if you understand that that's just, she's not supposed to touch anything that isn't within her family, and then putting it on the counter is totally understandable. There are some things that are small and they may not even think about. And if you say, so why won't you take it from my hand? It's like, well, I'm trying to hand you the money and she wants you to understand the cultures that you're working around. It helps to have a little basic information before you go ask a question and how you approach that person. You may not even be able to ask it of her. You'd have to ask her husband. It's do a little research before you go barreling in to ask a lot of, I don't know. It's just, I have seen it work both ways. Some ways it indicates that you're open and interested, and in other ways it feels to them like an attack.
Well, and I think you're right. Prep work can be very good. And, Alice had talked about doing some, basic prep work before engagement and exposure. Absolutely. I spent a month in Jordan, taking public buses and things like that, because I had heard that it was the most liberal of the Arabic countries. But I also rented a car and I was going around, and everyone has to see Petra at some time in their life, if they can. I used to tell people travel, but God, that's such a privileged position to be able to say that. So, but I ended up with like a $300 ticket to Jordan, and stayed in hostels and things like that. But I rented a car a couple days, and I had studied my Arabic for like 6 months before. And I went up to a group of men and I asked for directions, and no one responded to me. And I'm like, well, shoot, my Arabic must suck, you know? And so I had to ask for directions again. And there was a man who spoke English near me as I went up to another group of men and asked, and of course they didn't. And he looked at me, said, look, I can give you directions. And I'm like, yeah, well, my Arabic's not as good as I thought. And he said, no, they're just not going to answer your question because you're a woman. Your Arabic's fine. So that was a case I couldn't even approach, because any question, he wouldn't even answer because I was a woman. And a woman who, you know, didn't have her head covered or anything like this. Phew, forbid. A hussy woman. So yeah, so you're right. A little bit of prep goes a long way, indeed. Any other questions?
I don't see any other hands. I don't see any other questions in the chat. Does anyone have anything else? We are getting close to our time, but this has been a really good discussion. A lot of good questions. I captured some questions that we can make sure we review later.
Right.
And
Oh, you're welcome.
okay, so if we don't have any other questions, again, thank you, Dr. White, for the presentation. I will not try to recap certainly the presentation or the discussion. I do want to emphasize a couple things that I took away from it. So I hope you all have your own takeaways. And those two things are that cultural humility requires reflection, and that it's an ongoing process. And I bring that last point to the forefront simply because as we introduced our series, one of the things we talked about was that this would not be a space, or it was not our intention to bring folks into this space and say, okay, this is what you're wrong about and this is what you're right about, and we're going to fix you and show you how to be right. The space was created for us to learn together through these kinds of presentations and discussions. So if nothing else, I encourage you to think about the reflection that's required and the fact that none of us will ever get to the end of this kind of journey, but it's a journey that we have agreed to embark upon together. And I just encourage you to continue. Last comment is that we will follow up with you because we have your email from registration. So you will get the PowerPoint that Dr. White shared during her presentation, and we will tell you where the video recording from this session will be posted. Including in that communication will be a survey that we will ask you to take just a couple of minutes to complete and get back to us again with all the things that we do. We want to get better over time at what we offer and how we offer it to you. We certainly want you to continue to participate with us. So we hope to see some of the same faces and hear some of the same voices continuing as we continue our series. And you'll also get a reminder and a prompt for the next session, which will be on Thursday, May 20th at the same time. So we appreciate all of you being here, and have a good night, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.